going to be about us trying to make sense of what we just went through with the most recent election. So before we get started, I'm going to ask everyone to mute your mics and to turn off your cameras. I want to let you know that this meeting is being recorded, so just make sure that you're muted as much as you can be. And then at the end, if you guys have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them once our presenters are done. So I want to introduce all of our presenters to you today. Oh, and it went too fast. So I'm Misty Wilson-Mertens. I'm the Chair of Social Sciences, and I'm going to be hosting today.
I'm Angela Thurman. I am the Chair of Economics, Natural Sciences, and Kinesiology.
I'm Allegra Davis Hannah. I teach English and I'm the chair for humanities.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Cox and I'm an instructor for government.
So I guess my first question to the panel is just who won the election? And I guess we'll start with Texas and we'll work our way up.
Hi, so I'm going to do the Texas results and who won specifically here in Texas. So I have a picture of President Trump and our two senators up in the corner. The gentleman with the white hair that's facing him is John Cornyn, so that he was up for election this time, but Cruz, the gentleman in the sunglasses, was not. But for the president, what happens in Texas is we're a winner-take-all state. So whoever gets the majority vote in Texas wins all of our electoral college votes. So the percentages for the presidential race in Texas were that Trump was at 52.17% and Biden was at 46.4%. So Trump won Texas and he will get all of our electoral college votes. The U.S. Senate seat again, John Cornyn, the gentleman with the white hair there in the picture, was going up against Hager, and he won with 53.6% of the vote. He's a Republican. And in the U.S. House, Texas Republicans held on to all of their battleground seats, and the Democrats kept 2 seats that they'd flipped in 2018. But basically, there was no change with that said. So the Texas delegation will send 36 representatives to the U.S. House. That is the second largest. California, I believe, is the largest delegation. And they'll send 23 Republicans and 13 Democrats. For the Texas Senate, Democrats won back District 19. That was the one down South Texas where Flores, there generally, or the general gist of it is that the person that ran a couple cycles back went to jail. So the Republicans flipped that seat and it came back to the Democrats. So District 19 was won back by the Democrats. But all in all, there was no change because there's an open seat too that the Republicans won. So there was no change in the Texas Senate either between the Democrats and Republicans. The Texas House, the Republicans will keep the majority. That was the one where we thought, looking at the numbers, that possibly the Democrats would flip seats, but they didn't. They needed 9 seats to get the majority, but the Democrats only picked up 1 seat and lost another. So they were kind of dead even. There are a couple of contested races. I looked today to see if those have been resolved. There are 3 that could request a recount and did. And I haven't seen the results on that yet. So I'm not sure if they're going to do that recount and what's going to happen with those. But there are 3 to look out for on the House side. I don't think there's going to be a change in the numbers, so I doubt that those will flip. And then lastly, these state races, all of the state races, except for 4 appeals court seats, went to the Republicans. So like your railroad, education, all of those, your Texas Supreme Court, Court of Criminal Appeals, all went to Republicans, and the Democrats flipped 4 appeals court seats. So that's kind of the Texas results.
So we had talked in our previous webinar about Tarrant County being a really interesting place to watch. So Professor Cox, can you tell us anything about Tarrant County and what happened in this election?
Yeah, with Tarrant County, basically, I'm sorry, the results were really interesting. And I think that what happened with Tarrant County is they went Republican. I don't think that's a surprise, though, as far as the Republicans going to Tarrant County. And if you look at the statistics, Democrats did get a little bit of a bump, but not much. And I think that's really, um, I guess in the long run, we could say Tarrant County is still pretty red and conservative. I think they were looking at Democrats being more aggressive and closer to what Beto O'Rourke did, but that just didn't happen. So Tarrant County pretty much stayed red. I know for my vote, the people that I voted for in in the elections I voted for, I should say, Kay Granger was like at 62%. So Garin was uncontested in his race, so it was pretty easy for the Republicans in Tarrant.
I know that this election, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and just on this side, what happened in Texas as far as demographics, you guys can read the results there, but I think the big surprises were in really down in the Rio Grande Valley area. I think that a lot of Democrats thought that Latino voters would vote heavier for Biden, and that just wasn't the case, if that makes sense.
So I think that this was an election that we had a lot of people engaged in, probably more than I think the last few cycles we've been through. So what can we say about just turnout overall?
So turnout in Texas and in the United States was very high, which is great. I mean, the more people that are involved in elections, the better. So you can see in the chart on the left, early voting in Texas surpassed the totals from 2016. So we had more people vote early in some of these elections than voted at all last time. And you can see Texas is not the only state where that happened. So you can see on the right-hand side that voter turnout is estimated to be the highest in 120 years. So that's really, really good. So a lot of people got out. This election really got people, out of their chairs and to the voting polls, which is great.
That's really amazing just to see that kind of people are, contributing and participating in this democracy like that. We haven't seen that, like you said, in 100 years. It's amazing. Overall, if we look at nationally, how do you feel like the Republicans did in this election?
Well, it was a little bit of a surprise because we had talked in the last webinar about the expectation that there might be a blue wave. So Professor Cox pointed out that the whole blue and red thing is relatively new, but the blue wave would have meant that Democrats are considered blue, Republicans are red, that more Democrats would have flipped the seats based on polls. So you can see that the biggest surprise wasn't that Trump lost. The biggest surprise was that the Republicans did as well as they did based on the polls. So the biggest lesson for House Republicans was that this is a center-right country. So you can see that a lot of people thought that I'm going to say that we were more polarized than we are. So I actually think it's a good thing that we were as close as we were in so many races, because that tells you that a lot of the voices that we hear are either far right or far left. And it looks like the majority of the country is closer than we might have thought. So you can see the chart here that GOP women have flipped several Democratic seats. So the Democrats sort of did this last time, encouraging more and more women to run for office, and it was very positive. It worked very well, and now the Republicans are picking up that same tactic. So this is a good thing. We're seeing more underrepresented people, genders, races. Everyone is starting to step up, and that can only be good, because then we're going to see the House and the Senate be a little bit more representative of the country as a whole. So I think overall it's very positive.
Well, it's also showing that people weren't voting straight ticket, right? They were picking and choosing which party they went for which seat or which position.
Well, also, I think it's worth pointing out, and Professor Cox, you might want to weigh in here, that is not an option anymore. You used to be able to go in and just say all Republican, all Democrat, and then you could turn around and walk out. And you're not allowed to do that anymore. And I think that's a good thing because it does make people think about every single different race. I mean, there's always going to be the people that are just going to go in and go, bop, 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 bop. But hopefully it does make people become more thoughtful voters and look into the candidates in a way.
Yeah, in 2017 in the legislative session, I think it was 2017, they passed no more straight party ticket voting, and it took effect this year. So in 2018, when, for example, when Beto was running, you could still straight party ticket vote, and they were wondering about that impact in 2020, whether it would impact at all. I think it's a good thing too, though. I think that being able to go in and choose your people down the list versus just by party is actually makes you look harder at the candidates.
I agree.
So this is the same question, but reversed. How did the Democrats do overall?
As Professor Thurman pointed out, not as well as expected. They did win the popular vote for the presidency, which they've done in all but one election since 1992. But there was a lot of split ticket voting, meaning someone voted for Joe Biden and then voted for John Cornyn. And they were hoping to take a lot of several Senate seats, and they picked up fewer than they were hoping. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later. Who actually won the majority in the Senate is still not determined. And the Democrats were also hoping to add some seats in the House, meaning they were hoping to get some seats that belong to Republicans to go for Democrat, and some seats. They retain their majority, though. So the good-ish news, it's not great news, but the good-ish news is they did pick up a few Senate seats, like the one in Colorado. There's some great agreement on policies between, as Professor Thurman pointed out, we have new people coming in to the legislatures, and so there's a lot of issues where people agree. There's an upcoming runoff election in January for both Senate seats in Georgia. And, everybody is trying to kind of dissect what happened in the election. And so progressive policy positions could be helpful in future elections. But of course, that's all guesswork for now.
So for those of us who are old enough to remember the election in 2000, we know that sometimes it does take a long time to get presidential results back. But we haven't done that in 20 years, so this feels like it's taking a long time. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us why it's taking so long for us to know who won?
So the biggest reason is COVID-19. So we had 80% more mail-in ballots nationwide. More than 60 million people voted by mail, and mail-in ballots just take longer to count. There are 2 envelopes usually. In a lot of states, you have to verify a person's signature by hand, you have to compare it to things. You have to unfold things, uncrease things, make sure the marks are legible, run them through a machine. So it just takes an insanely longer amount of time. And a lot of states, the law is that you can't start counting until Election Day. And in some states, you can't start counting until the polls close on Election Day, which means they couldn't even start opening those envelopes until November 3rd. Now, in some states, they opened them as soon as they received them and started counting. It just depends on the state laws. So we went through the exact same process that we always do, but it was just slower to count those mail-in ballots. And the other reason it took long is a lot of states were close. And if they're closer, if it's 1 percentage point difference, they're not going to call the election for a particular state usually. So it's harder to make projections the closer the vote is. The process just varies by state, and so it took longer to call them. The other thing is lots of states like Nevada, or is it Nevada? I can't remember. They have these very deliberate vote counting processes. They're very, very careful with how they process ballots. And that's exacerbated when they have a high number of mail-in ballots. They didn't have the infrastructure in place necessarily to process, again, more than 60 million mail-in ballots nationwide.
I like this very academic picture you found.
Yeah, this is my favorite meme, right? So there were several days where it looked like Nevada was going to be the decision maker in terms of electoral votes. And we were all just like waiting, and they were it seemed like they were just taking their sweet time. But again, they were working as fast as they could using the process they had in place. They weren't trying to do that on purpose, but it was a funny meme.
Yeah, I really enjoyed all the TikToks of Nevada voting.
Yes, yes.
All right, so when will we officially, finally, fully know the results?
Well, some people say we do know the results, and that's why I have this picture from The Simpsons. It depends who you ask. A lot of people say that we do. As you know, Joe Biden is working out of an office that says Office of the President-elect. Almost every major media outlet is referring to him as president-elect. So for a lot of people, it's decided. I will say that media projections of who wins a state are very, very rarely wrong. So it's very unlikely that any of those states that I'm sure Kim is going to show you on an electoral map, it's very unlikely that any of those are going to change. But when we really know for sure, every state has an election certification deadline, and again, every state is different. So they have a deadline by which they have to certify their election counts. And then there's a convening of the much hated Electoral College. And when the Electoral College casts their votes, that's pretty much it.
So it does seem like we have the most complicated of all possible systems to do this. Professor Cox, can you explain to us what the Electoral College is?
I will try. So the general gist of it is it's really a state by state election system. I guess in the more formal it's a method for indirectly electing the president of the United States. It's established by Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 to be really boring, and we also have to add in the 12th and the 23rd amendments. So that's the technical piece of it. It's basically made up of 538 members. Each state has 2 senators, so that's part of it. And then the number of House members we have is added to that. And then District of Columbia gets 3 additional electors. All that together, 538. So to win the Electoral College, you need 270 electoral votes. And so each state, you see Texas there, has 38. We have 36 U.S. Congress members plus 2 senators. 36 plus 2 is 38. So we get 38. And I mentioned before that it really kind of depends on the state, how it's split. Nebraska, which has the little lines, and then Maine on the picture has little lines. They're striped. They do theirs a little bit different. They're more of a proportional, I want to say. But most states are like Texas, where it's winner take all. So whoever wins the state by a majority vote gets all those electoral votes. To get to the Electoral College, before I kind of move on, basically what happens is we have our primary election in March and we have our general election in November. But between March and November in Texas, there are 3 conventions. So delegates are sent if you vote, you can become a part of this. If you take my Texas government class, I walk you through this process. But in the summertime at the state convention,
Kim, we lost you, unless that's just me.
No, I can't hear her either.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, I can't hear either.
Okay then. All right, so I can do this part until we get Professor Cox back with us. So the Electoral College does have a very formalized way of meeting and deciding and voting. We do have this timeline. These are the actual dates these things were happened. These are not at all negotiable. So you guys can see that on the 14th of December, they will meet to cast their votes. And then by December, we will have them go to Congress. Congress will certify them. And then January 20th will be Inauguration Day, which I imagine will probably look a little different this time around. So I was going to ask Professor Cox if we've ever had times where the Electoral College didn't work. And the answer is we've had a few. So for those of you who've taken History 1302, you know about this one. In the 1876 election, we are going to have a presidential election that is literally decided by one person. The Electoral College couldn't determine the winner, so Congress set up a committee, 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans, 1 independent, and unsurprisingly, the 7 Democrats voted for the Democrat, the 7 Republicans voted for the Republican, and our 1 independent decided the election. But this is rare. We talk about this because it's not usual. Generally, usually, typically, the Electoral College works. So moving away from the actual process of it and getting more into what we see, how should we view the media and what's being reported on?
So the one thing everybody can agree on is that media outlets don't decide elections, and even media outlets don't think that they do. They make what they call projections. So they say something like, we are calling the state of Texas for Donald Trump, or we are calling the state of Texas for John Cornyn, but they don't decide who won a particular state. What's interesting to me, because I'm a huge nerd, what's interesting to me about media environments is that they have something called a decision desk, and it's a room that looks just like this one, okay? And it's really isolated from every other part of operation. And for the most part, they're not watching what other media outlets are doing. They're analyzing data to make their own projections about particular states and particular races. So just as an example, the Associated Press, in order to make their projections, and their projections are used by a lot of other people, they hire annually more than 4,000 reporters who go out to county election centers and get raw data and call in and report it. So they're all over the country. They employ 800 people who are just entering data and verifying that the data that they're entering lines up with what's possible. Then they run it through a bunch of algorithms to make sure that data isn't being entered incorrectly. Then they have people who are deeply familiar with the races and the states, and they use that data and they make a projection. And that projection is based on the vote totals that have come in, the records, the county voting records, the history of how those people have voted, and a comparison between what's happening in the county and what's happening in the state. So they use all of this historical and constantly updated vote count data to make what they call projections. And as I said, they're almost never wrong because they wait until they're virtually certain before they make that projection. Now, famously, this election, Fox News called Arizona a week before anybody else did, but they ended up not being wrong. But other people had their own process and they wanted to wait.
It seems like there's a lot of like statistics and math involved in this.
It's all math, and a lot of these people running decision desks have multiple PhDs in math and statistics. They're not watching the news. They're not, as you can tell, they're not basing their decision on what other news agencies are doing. So it's not like, well, ABC called it, so we can go ahead and call it. That decision desk is isolated and independent of everything else.
So knowing all of that, how trustworthy is our media surrounding elections?
Very. So they have what they call easy calls, which they say the polls are closing in this state, and Texas used to be an easy call. So as soon as the polls close, based on historical data, they could say, okay, we're calling it for a particular presidential candidate. Tough calls. You need a consensus among multiple really smart math people. But they have a whole range of different terminology that they use and things that you've probably heard them say. So again, they call it a projected winner. That's who they say, that's what their decision desk has analyzed. Sometimes they say apparent winner, and that's when their decision desk calls it, but there's some reason that it's being contested. So they say he's the apparent winner. Winner is what they say when there's really no chance of going back. But what you probably heard a lot if you were watching the news on election night was you heard a lot of too early to call and too close to call. And those are virtually the same. Too early to call means they just don't have enough information. So they don't have enough vote counts in, and historical data says there's a possibility it could be either one. Too close to call means we probably have millions and millions of votes, but and here's an example of a too close to call Ohio House race. The difference was only 1,700 votes, and you can see that each one of them had over 100 or about 100,000 votes. So that was too close. They wanted to really wait until every single vote was counted. The reason I grabbed this screenshot is I thought it was interesting that it was too close to call, even though it was 100% of the precincts reporting. So you can tell that they're being very, very careful in a lot of these races that were close so that they don't make a bad call.
Well, it's interesting that this terminology has very specific meanings, but I don't think they do a good job of explaining that to just a casual viewer.
They do not. And they have to, well, Kim, it's okay, because when you dropped out, it was the historical part, and we had a backup historian. So I'm glad you're back, Kim. But yeah, no, they don't explain it. And the other thing is they probably explained it 10 minutes ago, and then you turn on the TV. They don't want to have to explain it every 5 minutes. But yeah, I watched a lot of news in the past month, and never once did they actually explain it on air, that when I was watching any of the channels I was watching. So I had to actually look this up and read a few articles to make sure I had this right. But I'm constantly was wondering, what's the difference between too early and too close? And again, it's not a really important distinction for us watching. What it means is we have to wait and find out what happens.
So I think another thing we've heard a lot since Election Day is about the polls, and if the polls are right or wrong, how right or wrong they were. So what do we know about the polls?
Well, the polls are based on what people will answer. So if people will not correctly answer a poll or will not answer it honestly, or if the question is couched in such a way that it can be ambiguous, then you may not have a good polling result. So a lot of this has been explained by people that were Trump supporters not wanting to come out and say, yes, I'm a Trump supporter for whatever reason, or by a lack of trust in the media. So that's been a big topic for this election, that many people do not trust the media. They feel like it is biased or slanted one way or another. So when someone calls and asks a question, they may think, well, I'm not going to answer because it doesn't matter what I answer anyway. You're going to report it however you want to. So, I've seen a lot of articles that say the big loser in this election has been the media. So whether you trust the media or not is going to determine whether you agree with that statement or not. But you can see in this graph Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and you could see how accurate the trust is in the mass media, and based on whether or not you trust the media to accurately portray what you say, that I think will bias the polls.
Could some of this also just be changing technology? I don't have a landline, and if somebody calls my cell phone that I don't know, I'm not answering it.
Yeah, it could be. And then also, if you think about it, where are these people coming from? Like if they go out, for example, I know they used to do a lot of polls in the malls. Well, people aren't going to the malls, and especially right now, people are not going to the malls. So that's it. That is an excellent point. Where are they getting these people? If they're only calling people with landlines, that's a decreasing number of people that have a landline. I don't have a landline either. And a lot of people block incoming calls that they don't know about. So they may be just like calling in general, and it just is going to depend on who actually accepts that call. So that's a great point.
So we've heard a lot, and I think maybe in the last 8 years, especially, about misinformation. Mm-hmm. So what do we mean by that, and what are we really talking about?
So for a long time, what we were talking about was fake news. And fake news doesn't typically come from national news organizations. Fake news comes from fake news websites or people like, bloggers or people who post things on Facebook. Fake news doesn't come from CBS for the most part. Sometimes CBS makes an honest mistake, but that's not where fake news comes from. And I will say that this year, especially post-election, so from November 3rd forward, most misinformation has not come from mainstream media sources. The misinformation that is widely circulating, and I'm including conspiracy theories or things that are factually inaccurate, those are not coming from media sources. Media sources have all, and I'm including all of them, right? CBS, ABC, NBC, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Fox News, they reported the election results and projections accurately and fairly. Again, they all do it differently, but they all did it accurately and fairly. Not a single election projection was faked or exaggerated for any kind of ulterior motive. There have been unfounded claims of election fraud that have flooded the internet in the past 10 days, and social media sites are doing all they can to mitigate the spread of false information. They do a few things. They put flags and warnings on things that are disputed. They have actually done this to me several times. If you're retweeting a news article, they know that you didn't read it. And so they ask you, hey, do you want to read this before you retweet it? And that's just a kind of a warning. So like before you spread it, do you want to actually know what it says? And they will block users temporarily or permanently for violating terms of service. So if you threaten someone's life or you say something that incites violence, they'll block you from using their site.
So just to reiterate, wrong is not the same thing as fake.
What do you
I
mean?
I could have been reporting and think I have all my information right. Like I'm going to say that Biden's going to win Texas.
Right. So what Angie or what Professor Thurman was just talking about, like pollsters making predictions, a lot of them were very wrong about their predictions, but that's why they say there's a percentage likelihood. So they say there's a 90% likelihood that someone's going to win. And so maybe it doesn't turn out to be the person they predicted, but they're still within their margin of error. But yeah, wrong or mistaken is different than fake. And in 2016, the disinformation campaign preceded the election. So you had all these like fake Facebook organizations and all of those people from other countries who were trying to persuade people using social media. And this year that happened a little bit, not nearly as much, but the disinformation storm has instead followed the election.
So all of us want to be good stewards of information. Nobody wants to put something out that's incorrect, I think. None of our students anyway. None of our students.
Yeah.
So how do we guard against passing on misinformation? What can we do to make sure that we are not contributing to the noise?
So the first thing I'll say is verify information in multiple reputable national news agencies. Another thing that news agencies don't necessarily explain super well is that there's a difference between analysis, opinion, and reporting. So all national news agencies reporting can be trusted, right? They use a system of journalistic ethics. They fact check. They have multiple sources. They can be trusted. Analysis and opinion, like what comes on Fox News and MSNBC from 7 to 10 p.m. when people are talking about their opinions, that's opinions, right? So that's when you're going to see a lot of slant in one direction or another. But the reporting that national news agencies do can be trusted. So if you hear something, look it up on CBS and the Wall Street Journal. Is it in multiple reputable national news agencies? If not, it's not something that can be verified. Be very careful because, celebrities, elected officials, famous people, some Instagram influencers, all those people can post things that are fake, false, or misleading. There's no law against it. So Twitter or Instagram might ban you, but you're not breaking the law if you post misleading information, unless it's dangerous. avoid rogue information sources. I didn't know a better way to say this, but just something that you found on Facebook and you can't really tell where it came from, or something that says it's a news agency and you've never heard of it before. Our students are actually pretty savvy when it comes to being able to tell if something's real or fake, looking for spelling and typographical errors, looking for things that just look weird, shady, and have too many ads on the page. Listen and look for opinion, high level. I mean, you can tell when someone is being very emotional. You can tell when someone is being very biased. And we're all allowed to have opinions, but that doesn't make someone with an opinion, a loud opinion, a reputable source. You yourself have to be careful that you're not stating opinions as facts. And the last thing I want to remind you is that truth exists, right? Some things are true and some things are not true. So for a lot of issues, there's two sides to something, and we could debate whether we should have an estate tax, or we could debate whether property taxes are the best way to fund schools. And there's two or more sides of those questions, and all of those sides have information to support their argument. But some things are just true or not true. So the earth is not flat. You don't have an opinion about whether the earth is flat. Either you understand that it's not, or you're incorrect, right? And the same thing happens with evidence of widespread voter fraud. There is none, right? So that's not something that you can have an opinion about. You either understand the facts or you're incorrect. And you can feel lots of different ways, and all of those feelings are valid, but you have to follow information if you want to be a responsible citizen.
Okay, so at this point, we've talked about news media, but I want to talk about a different kind of media as well.
Okay.
Texas being a swing state, for the first time, I think, in my adult life, we had just an overwhelming amount of political ads. So
Yes.
How does this look different than, well, obviously the news media? And really, what are these ads doing and how do they work?
So I will tell you that just an insane amount of money was spent on political advertising this year. And one thing I want to remind you of is that the winner of political advertising is media companies, especially local media companies like NBC5. They make lots and lots of money during election cycles because that's where ads are airing. So a lot of money went into already very wealthy corporations to fund political ads. One thing that is new in the last, I don't know, since I became an adult, is that if it's an official campaign approved advertisement, the person who's running for the office has to say that they approve the message at the end. So you've probably heard, I'm Joe Biden and I approve this message. I'm Lynn Stuckey and I approve this message at the end of a commercial. That is designed to indicate to you that that person's campaign is airing that ad, because there are a lot of ads that are not aired by campaigns. A lot of interest groups and political action committees create advertisements that aren't from that candidate. And it was very, very hard 20 years ago to differentiate between who was funding a particular advertisement. And a lot of times a really mean ad would air and then a candidate would say, I had nothing to do with that. So they just wanted to clarify. And that's why you have, I approve this message. And this is just a meme from Parks and Recreation because I wanted something funny. The biggest difference between political ads and things that get printed in newspapers is that ads are not fact checked, and lying in political ads is 100% legal. So you can lie about yourself, your opponent, or anything else in a political advertisement. There is no law against it. There is no reason you can't do it. And so if you hear something in a political ad that you find to be compelling, again, I would advise you to research it and see what the truth is. A lot of times things are taken out of context.
I don't know what just happened. My computer went crazy.
That's okay.
So again, we are in this changing world, right? Polling is having to adjust. I imagine that ads are having to adjust as well.
Yeah, so it's important to remember that TV, radio, and print ads are regulated in some way by the Federal Elections Commission or the Federal Communications Commission. So there's some regulation of what happens in those advertisements, but those aren't the only kind of ads we have. We've had TV political ads since 1952. And those are broadly targeted. So if they want to target male voters, for instance, they advertise during sporting events. And a lot of times TV ads, excuse me, are designed for what they call low information voters. That doesn't mean that anyone is stupid. It just means that these are people who are less invested in the election, so they're not constantly looking things up. And so you're going to have big emotional appeals. You're often going to have, the sun rise over an American flag, and they're going to try and make very patriotic appeals to those voters, because those are voters less interested necessarily in certain particular policies, and those are people really interested in who represents my values.
Well, and I imagine those are also voters that you can change their minds.
Yes.
Whereas
exactly.
if somebody's very engaged, you're probably not going to change their mind with a 30-second TV ad.
That's correct. And advertisement really is only designed for people who don't have strong feelings about politics, because you're not going to change me personally. You're not going to change my mind no matter how many ads you post. So they are designed for swing voters, for less people who are less invested in elections, who have less information. Broadly, 2004. Online ads are disturbingly precisely targeted. And I'm not being funny. It is disturbing how precisely these advertisers can target you. They can target you geographically, of course, demographically, and that's any demographics: income, age, gender, ethnicity, whether you're married or not married, whether you're divorced, whether you're widowed, whether you have kids, what languages you speak, cultural influences, your interests, whether you went shoe shopping, whether you bought a Rolex. They can target you using your internet service provider. They can target you based on your shopping patterns. And best of all, they have dozens and dozens of unknown algorithms based on your behavior online, or your behavior on Facebook, or the way that you search for things. They can tell particular things about you, and if you Googled something, then they know something else about you, and they use all of that information to very precisely target you with advertising. And those ads are only regulated by the media organization. So if it's on Facebook, Facebook is the only person who's regulating whether that ad can stay there or not.
That's comforting.
Yeah, it's real creepy, man. You should stop using the internet completely. I'm just kidding. You can't do that. But you should be very, very wary of the advertising, because they are targeting you. And they're targeting your values and what you care about. And they're trying to manipulate you based on that, for sure.
So as of right now, where do we stand? What's going on?
So in the Senate, there are 48 people 48 Democrats will be in the Senate in January, and at least 50 Republicans. There are 2 more Senate seats, and that will decide whether we have a 50-50 split or whether Republicans have control of the Senate.
So why didn't Georgia just get it together and vote when all the rest of us did?
So for 2 different reasons. One was a special election, and one of these is a runoff because no one got at least 50% of the vote. But you see there are 2 Republican candidates and 2 Democratic candidates. Everybody in Georgia has the opportunity to vote on January 5th, and they're voting for both of their senators, which is highly, highly unusual. Usually like this year we voted for John Cornyn, and in 4 years we'll be voting on Ted Cruz's seat. Very unusual to vote for both of your senators at the same time. And I'm also curious to know if these 2 Senate seats are going to stay. Maybe Kim can answer that question. They're supposed to be staggered, right? So that you're not doing this, electing both senators at the same time. They're supposed to be staggered several years apart. So I wonder how they're going to stagger these. But
Yeah,
anyway.
They usually do stagger them, I guess, because one was a special election. It's probably the state is setting the rules for that. So probably how would they stagger it? They may have, I know in Texas they've done this before where they'll have a special election, which will be off so that they can get back on that staggered calendar, if that makes sense. So
Mhm.
I'd have to look at Georgia's state laws, but I'm guessing they may get them back on track, if that makes sense.
So they would shorten the term length.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we will find out. As Dr. or as Professor Thurman pointed out, can't really trust polls at this point. Polls aren't really meaningful, and nobody really knows what's going to happen. Georgia did go for Joe Biden, so there are a lot of Democratic voters in Georgia, but it traditionally is a pretty red state, and so we'll see what happens.
So are we at least done voting for now?
No, we're not.
Yeah, no, there's going to be a few runoffs at city, county, and state level, and I'm going to recommend that everybody looks at the upcoming election pages for their county and their city. The Secretary of State already has one listed as District 30, and that one really, John Ratliff, when he became the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratliff, when he became the Director of National Intelligence, that seat became vacant. And so there was a special election that was held on September 29th, and it was basically put on the calendar by the governor of Texas. So that one, the early voting for Senate District 30 starts December 8th, and the actual election date is December 19th. It's Archer, Clay Cook, Erath, I never can say that one, Grayson, Jack Montague, Palo Pinto, Parker, Wichita, Wise, Young, Collin, and Denton counties are part of that. So there's a lot of counties involved in that one. Then I noticed looking through some of the pages, Denton, for the city of Denton, says that their candidates runoff list will be done after the canvassing, which is today. Their final canvassing has to be done by November 17th. So they'll post their official runoff candidates after today. Tarrant County also listed that theirs are upcoming. Arlington had a District 7 city council race already posted. But again, a lot of them we're waiting still. So I would, go to Tarrant County, go to your City of Fort Worth pages and look that up. And I put on the bottom of this slide that there's, I know it wasn't a runoff, but the city elections, City of Fort Worth general election is May 1st, 2021. And Betsy Price Mayor is on that as well as others. But I just thought I'd throw that one in for fun.
And I just want to say that runoff elections are particularly important to vote in because fewer people vote, meaning that really every vote matters even more. And so, for instance, in Denton, we voted for mayor earlier this month, and neither person got enough votes, so we're having a runoff. And turnout is expected to be really, really low, which means a few votes could decide who our mayor is. And so if you do have a runoff election or an election in May or an election in between big cycles, they are particularly important for you to vote in because fewer people are likely to vote.
Yeah, I think the last Fort Worth mayor election, 7% of our population voted?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's typically under 10%. It's really low. So your voice is magnified hugely.
So, Professor Cox, I'm so glad you're back because I could handle the history, but I cannot handle
You don't want this one?
I don't want this one. So, can you tell us what's going on with the court cases that have been filed?
Oh, I hope so. I looked it up and it looked like I may have missed a few. I'll be completely honest. There were 21 court cases filed. When I looked at it, we put these slides together. I sent to you on Thursday or Friday, and already this needs to be updated. So I'm just telling you what you have on there. There's actually 3 cases remaining and ongoing in Pennsylvania. One of them has to do with the postmarks on the ballot. That's the U.S. Supreme Court case, which I'll mention here in a minute. One of them is about absentee ballots. There are only 600 of those. And there's one claim which is interesting. They're saying that the 2-tier voting system of in-person and in-mail violates the Constitution. That's one of those equal protection clause things that you keep hearing about. So those are the general gist of the 3 remaining in Pennsylvania. So I'm going to jump down to Michigan. Michigan, the case is on appeal. They actually lost that one, but now it's been appealed. And the claim on that one is that there's an unidentified poll worker who told a lawyer serving as a poll watcher that the ballot dates were being changed. And the court, they couldn't provide any proof. So the court said that's hearsay. Hearsay is inadmissible evidence. And so that one's on appeal. Georgia, the case was dismissed, I believe, on oh God, was it yesterday? Due to the hand recount that's being processed. So that one was dismissed. Arizona, vote center counts versus voter precincts is being challenged, how they do that. And in a general sense, that has to do with the hand recounts being used as a quality check to the machine counts, and that's being challenged. I'm not quite sure why that one's being challenged, but it's a really weird case. I don't expect it to go anywhere. Wisconsin, the Trump campaign says that they're going to ask for a recount, but they haven't officially filed yet. They have to wait till all 72 counties have completed their canvassing, which they're about to do today. They have to be finished today. And the runner-up also, whoever's the runner-up in that race, once the 72 counties are done today, must be within 1% of the winner to get an automatic recount. If it's not automatic, this is the interesting part, I think, then the runner-up can request a recount, but they have to pay for it. And the estimate of that right now is $7.9 million. So that's huge. Nevada, real quick, there's a question over 3,000 ballots claiming that they're ineligible voters. That's the one where I don't remember her first name. Her last name is Stoke, Stokke. She's 79. She's blind, and she said when she went in that she was told she already voted by mail. The workers there at the poll said, well, you can provide a provisional ballot. Please let us. She'd mentioned that she thought her neighbor had stolen her ballot. They asked for a name. She wouldn't give them the name. She wouldn't fill out the provisional ballot. So in that particular one, they asked for an injunction to stop the count totally in the state. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. The case is not gone, though. The briefs are due by November 19th. So that one's still pending. And then the last one is the U.S. Supreme Court case. They declined to hear, I've got their Pennsylvania case, that they left it open that they may bring it back up, but they're waiting for the election to be totally done. It only involves those 10,000 votes that I have listed there, but those votes have not been included in the Pennsylvania count. So regardless, it won't impact the outcome of what we see right now in Pennsylvania. And the general gist of all this is that most of those suits are claiming fraud or to stop the certification process. And most of them don't have a whole lot of evidence to back it up from what I'm seeing. And that's just if you look at the filings in the court. If you go through and pull from the state of Pennsylvania's court records, you can look at the claims and the filings. There's not a whole lot there. So most of the courts are saying, look, if you can bring us more evidence, we'll take a look at it. But right now, we're not finding a whole lot. Even the Supreme Court's kind of going, bring us more, we'll look at it. And I didn't put on here, but the Dominion software, that's another one that I think is going to come up. Dominion is the machines that are used in the software that's used by several of the states. It's a Canadian company, I believe, and I believe their headquarters here in the States are in Denver, Colorado. Georgia yesterday, one of the reps for the Secretary of State came on and said that they had already had an independent audit of their Dominion software and did not find any errors. So I imagine that a lot of the places where Dominion's being used, those audits are going on, and that'll come into play. And if they don't find any errors, that's going to be a hard one to prove as well. So I don't know that most of these cases, if you look at them on the merits, on the factual information that's been presented to date, that there's a whole lot there. And that's just strictly my opinion. They could come up with more, though.
And all of those filings are public, right? You can go pull them yourself.
You can go pull them and have fun reading them. So there's a lot. There's summaries you can find online, but you can actually go pull all the filings. They're public records. So
if anybody wants to have a fun weekend.
Yeah, there's a lot. Have fun with those.
So Texas is a little strange in that our legislature meets every other year, and 2021 is a legislative year. So what's coming up that we should probably keep an eye on?
This one's interesting. I think that one thing is I have the money picture there, and that's because the budget. We are required by our Constitution in Texas to balance our budget. So there's a budget that's going to come up. The second picture is regarding the speaker's race. That one's a fun one to look at. Now, the Republicans in the House, the Speaker of the House is who we're talking about. Bonin is not running, and you can go look him up on the Texas Tribune and find all the trouble he got into last session. But the gentleman whose picture there is Dade Phelan, he's from Beaumont. He's kind of the forerunner, I think, for the House position. But there's a big fight with the Texas GOP head, Alan West, who says He doesn't want Phelan because he thinks he's working with the Democrats to get a consensus to get him elected. So that one should be a fun one to watch. The third picture is my picture for pre-filing. They can actually start pre-filing as of yesterday, all the bills. So you can go, again, I think a good resource is the Texas Tribune site. They have a list of all the pre-filings to date. So there's marijuana law, there's stuff on some of the financing and all that that's already being processed through. So they can start pre-filing their bills for the session November 16th. Redistricting is a huge one. We just had the census, so all that redistricting is going to be done in this session. I put the recount one because we still have those 3 House seats that are, can request a recount and possibly be an issue. So I put that one in there. And then the train one, basically has to do with money, which I think is kind of fun. The legislature is entering what they call the late train phase, where they cannot raise campaign funds between December 13th and late June. And the reason they do that is so that you can't have lobbyists bribing people while the session's going on, because the session is basically going to go from January to the end of May, first part of June, unless there's a special session after that. So that's kind of a general gist of things to look out for.
So just because we finished voting doesn't mean you can just turn your brain off and stop paying attention.
No,
you
definitely
still
not.
need to pay attention. All right, and kind of keeping on that same theme, I know this seems like a long way away, but 2020 midterms really aren't that far away, are they?
Well, 2020 is almost over, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, no, it's not that far away, and I'm sure people will start campaigning. Every seat in the House of Representatives is up for re-election every 2 years, so it's very rowdy, and all of those people that we just voted for the House of Representatives will be up for re-election in 2022, and will, I'm sure, start fundraising yesterday. And 34 out of the 100 total Senate seats will be up for re-election or up for election in 2022. So again, those are 6-year terms and they're staggered. So some are in the presidential years and some are in midterm years. Neither Ted Cruz nor John Cornyn will be up for re-election in 2022. So really, in national politics, we're only looking at the House of Representative seats. And it is pretty typical. This is a very weird graph, but it's pretty typical for whatever party the president belongs to for the midterms to be favorable for the other party. So as you see, anytime we had a Democratic president, we've lost Democratic seats in the House, and anytime we had a Republican president in midterms, we would lose Republican seats in the House and Senate, with the exception of the 2002 midterm elections. That's the only time that we had a Republican president, George W. Bush, and that they picked up seats in the midterm elections. Otherwise, so it didn't go super favorably for Democrats this year in the House and the Senate, and it's probably going to be a little bit worse in midterms. But again, that's a projection based on polling, and we know that that's not always super accurate.
And just so that we're being clear, why do we call it a midterm election?
Because it's midway through the presidential term.
Okay, just so everyone was on the same page.
Yes, sorry, yeah.
I mean, we're trying not to be the media and actually tell you what these terms mean.
So the presidential election was in 2020. The next one will be in 2024. Halfway through that presidential term is midterm elections.
So the last webinar, we gave our predictions, and I wanted to show you guys how we did. I didn't think that we did that well, but Professor Thurman corrected me and said that we did at least as well as all of the pundits on TV did. So as far as the percent of Texans that voted, it was 57. So I said that both Professor Cox and I got it right. If we're using Price is Right rules, I got it right, but actual averages, I think she's closer. As far as Trump versus Biden, Professor Cox cut closest. We all got Cornyn. None of us got the House seats. And of course, we won't know 2040 until like 20 more years. So
are we coming back to do another webinar in 20 years?
Maybe we should. But as it stands now, Professor Cox wins.
Yay, I guess.
I think that's fair because I definitely think you spent the most time looking at the numbers.
I looked at a lot of stats. I will be honest, my eyeballs started to cross.
So I know this is the thing that everyone has a question about right now. How do you get attendance for being here? So if you look in the chat right now, Professor Davis has just put in the form. Go fill that out. That is how you get credit for being here. The last question on that form is going to ask you what you would like us to look into next semester. I think we are wanting to take a semester off of politics, but if there's something that you find interesting, something you want us to investigate, let us know. And we will have that flyer out probably sometime in mid-January. Thank y'all for being here.
And if you have a question, you're welcome to ask it. I didn't see any questions that weren't answered in the chat, but if you have a question, you're welcome to ask.